Well, I guess we'll start. The mic is on. It's an honor for me to be here. Ever since you joined our conference here, I've been saying, let's go down some morning and just see how they do church at Holly Grove. Well, we're finally here, but I guess I wasn't determined enough. It took an invitation. I appreciate that opportunity to come and be with you today. Sound okay? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I got the invitation because of having done a workshop at our conference. I was given the assignment of Jesus and generosity. Who was it from here that was there? You all? Anyway. So it's an honor to come and share some of those things with you today. I started that little talk by sharing a story that happened many years ago at a pastor's conference. We had a guy there by the name of John Phillips, who's, by the way, is a very great Bible teacher. You could probably Google John Phillips, and he's amazing. But he was there. My brother, Clint, was MC of the conference, and I don't know why he and John Phillips got into quite a few different little kind of sparring matches in their introductions. And when Clint had finished introducing John Phillips quite dramatically with all the things that books he had written and stuff, John got up. He said, "Oh my, Clint, you didn't need to do all that." He said, "It reminds me of the guy who was teaching on some financial principles, and he was introduced as the man that made millions in oil in Texas." When the guy got up to speak, he said, "I need to clarify that a bit." He said it wasn't oil, it was coal, and it wasn't Texas, it was Pennsylvania, and it wasn't millions, it was a couple 100,000. And then he said, "I didn't make it, I lost it." And then he finished it by saying, "It wasn't me, though, it was my brother." So my brother Clint and I have been kicking that whole thing around quite a few years since then. But I thought I should start with a disclaimer today. I don't feel overly qualified. I really don't. To me, this thing of generosity, though, one of the greatest privileges we have as Christians. If you get a hold of it, it'll change your life. There's one thing that I think of often, and that is, I don't know if the rest of you have this, but for quite a few years, one of the great desires I have is God's approval. You all know what I mean? We should be of a kindred spirit to have that desire. And one of the scriptures that has always kind of challenged me but encouraged me, God loves a cheerful giver. That's pretty neat, isn't it? One way to bring his love, affection, to become the apple of his eye is be a generous giver. In fact, I warn people, if you give begrudgingly, maybe don't give. If you groan every time somebody else is going on a mission trip and do I have to help them go on vacation attitude, that's probably not that good. Anyway. So in my talk, I started with a little bit of a bio. My greatest claim to fame is I married Polly Heatwell. She's here today. You know, one of the things, some of you would identify with this, I clearly married up, but she doesn't always feel that. I don't know if you men ever face that when you don't always communicate as well as you should to your own wife. But we have 6 children. Sometimes when I say that, I make sure people know one wife, but 1 wife, 6 children, 25 grandchildren, and very soon we'll have our 3rd great-grandchild. So I was born and raised in Greenwood, Delaware. Grew up on a dairy farm. I milked cows, bought my dad's farm, and then in about probably 1984, I think it would have been, we were asked to go as missionaries to Trinidad. So we sold the farm. By the time we got back to the mission board and said we're ready to go, they said, sorry, Mark, someone else went and we don't have any place for you. As I look back, I think probably wiser heads prevailed, that they realized that this was an uneducated guy. I don't remember thinking about it then, but I'm kind of glad someone wiser made that decision. We didn't know what to do. We sold our farm, so we went to Ohio and pastored a small church in the Mount Gilead, Mansfield area, church called Johnsville Mennonite Church. Some of you might recognize that name. We were there 5 years. At the end of that, we had 6 children. I remember very distinctly one day that feeling that I have 6 children. We have. So I have a wife.
Bear with me, Mark. I'm just going to get the mic. Do you think?
All right. Would you prefer if I stayed close to this mic?
I don't think the other one.
Anyway, my dad called me one day and he said, would you come work for me in the nursing home? He was getting to retirement age, and I remember I said, honestly, I was at a place in my life I didn't know what to do. I knew how to milk cows, and I enjoyed it, but I had never learned to build or lay a block, and I wasn't educated. I dropped out of high school. I had 6 children and a wife, and I was wondering, how in the world am I going to do this? And Dad said, would you come work for me? And I said, Dad, I have 6 children. Can we feed them? His answer was, we can try. And I tell people we've been trying ever since. Mostly today, if I were to be honest with you, I feel very much like a spectator. I tell a story. I'll stay put. What's the matter? I didn't.
You like to move. I feel it. Let's turn this on. There you go.
Does that work? And I get to move around now?
Feel free to roam.
All right. Thank you. So, one day I got a phone call from my nephew, and he said, Uncle Mark, I'd like to come talk to you. I said, I'm in my office, just come on. He came over and he had a long yellow notebook and I think a couple colored pens. I guess he was going to highlight in red the most important things. He said, Uncle Mark, he said, you've been a very, very successful businessman. I want to be a successful businessman. I'd like to hear your secrets. And I said to him, David, put your pen and paper away. Because what I will tell you is I have mostly been a spectator watching God do amazing things. I don't have any secrets. He wasn't impressed. He said, suppose I went to see a Muslim man and he told me that. And I said, I can't speak for the Muslim guy. I can only speak for me. But I did tell him, I'll try to put some things together. I'll give it some thought. Over the years, I've been working at that. And what you're hearing today is some of those principles that I have come to believe in strongly. And let me begin by what I believe is the most important financial principle, but it's the most important principle in parenting. It's the most important principle in spiritual warfare. It's the most important principle in everything that you do. And hear this, if you don't get anything else, and you get this, it's worth your time here today. Here it is. Make sure you own nothing. Did you get that? That's the most important principle of life. You own nothing. Jesus is the one that, it's a very interesting thing that happens, the story there in Luke chapter 14. Some of you would know this. He has a large crowd that are following him. And I don't know all the reasons the crowd was following him. Some for food, some for entertainment. I'd go watch to see somebody raised from the dead, I think. I'd join that crowd to see the lame walk and the blind see and all that. But anyway, there was a large crowd. And he finally turns to this crowd and he says to them, unless you hate father and mother, brother, sister, wife, and children, yea, your own life, you cannot be my disciple. And then he gives two stories, illustrations. The first one is, he says, no one sets out to build a house or a tower or whatever your translation would say, unless he first sits down and counts the cost, because he doesn't want to get into it. I want you to get this. He doesn't want to get into it and not be able to finish. And no king will go to war without first trying to decide, can I win this war? Because again, he doesn't want to get into it and not be able to finish. And listen to me very carefully today. If you've struggled in your Christian life and you've been a quitter and you've been someone that has started and had seasons when you decided it's not worth it, Jesus gives you the key right here to sticking to it. You know what it is? You count the cost beforehand. And he says, in the same way, listen to me, in the same way, unless you give all that you have, you cannot be my disciple. When I was young and I heard that, I would think, what a tough, tough requirement. Jesus, isn't there something left for me? And how do I sell that to young people? Anybody else recognize those feelings? God used a story a few years back that totally changed my heart about giving everything. It's the story of the Gibeonites. It's found in, I think, Joshua about 8 to 10. It's an incredible story. It has absolutely changed my life. And here it is. The Gibeonites were a tribe there in the land of Israel. And they knew about what happened in Egypt and the plagues and the coming out of Egypt. They heard all those stories of the sea parting and the Israel walking through on dry ground and the Egyptian soldiers drowning. And they heard about water from the rock and manna from heaven. Where they were, they could probably look over and see this tribe for 40 years in a wilderness, maintained by, I guess, still water from a rock and manna from heaven and clothes not wearing out. They heard all this. And they knew that they were coming to conquer the land. And sure enough, one day, here comes the army. And they get the Jordan River at flood stage, and the river stops, and they walk across, and they do something silly, walk around Jericho 7 times, conquer Jericho. And then they go and conquer Ai, and the Gibeonites are rightfully scared. These are mighty warriors. And somebody hatched a plan. They said, let's go to Joshua. They got some old worn out shoes, some moldy bread, some old, I guess, wineskins that looked old, and off they go to Joshua. And they come to Joshua. They said, we've heard about your great God and the conquerings you've done. We have come to you today from a far country. We want to make a treaty with you that you won't destroy us. Now you might say, what does this have to do with finances? Hang in there. They said, we want to make a treaty with you that you won't destroy us. Joshua says to them, how do I know? How do we know you've come from a far country? They said, well, look, these sandals were new. Our bread, our moldy bread, was fresh out of the oven when we left. And there's a very interesting little phrase. It says Joshua did not inquire of the Lord. He just signed a treaty. We won't destroy you. 3 days later, they come to the city of the Gibeonites. I'm not sure if it so happened or if they heard, but they come to the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites come out with their treaty. They said, you made us a promise. It's an interesting little story to me because there seems to be a bit of discussion. And they say, you know what, we made a promise, we better keep it. But then Joshua did something interesting. He said, we're not going to kill you, but we now own you. You are our slaves. You'll do what we say. You'll carry our water and our wood and whatever. You now belong to us. And these Gibeonites says, that's fine. To save our lives, that's fine. Now I want to know today, just curious, who knows what happened next? Who knows what happened next? I'm just curious. It's a very fascinating story. There were 5 kings, small kingdoms. They heard about the treaty that the Gibeonites made with Joshua, and they said, uh-oh, these are mighty warriors. If they join with Joshua, we're all in trouble. Let's go destroy them. And as I tell this story, if Joshua, by the way, what is a epiphany? It's when something dawns on you, kind of. Is that what that is? So that I was reading this story one morning, and I had an epiphany, or something dawned on me. Because in this story, if Joshua had not made slaves of the Gibeonites, he could have stood back and let those 5 kings do what he couldn't do. But because he made slaves of them, the Gibeonites sent word to Joshua, and they said, your servants need help. And Joshua was duty-bound on his honor to go and protect his slaves. It's the story where God made the sun stand still so Joshua could defend his slaves. As I read that morning, in fact, as I tell you that right now, there's something holy comes over me. And I said to the Lord, if you approved of Joshua defending his slaves who deceived him, what will you do for me if every day I voluntarily become your slave and give you everything? I won't tell you it's been every day, but almost every day since then, I go through a morning prayer. Jesus, I'm yours. Everything I have is yours. My health, and by the way, the more things you can name, the better. My finances, my marriage, my children, my grandchildren, my reputation, my ministry, my business, my hopes, my dreams, I give them to you again today. I belong to you because you are the creator. You have the right of being a creator. I belong to you because you have provided, protected, defended. By the fact that you sustain the world would fall apart without you. I belong to you by redemption. When I was lost and dead in my sins, Christ died for me, and I'm yours by choice, a choice I make again today. There's something really special about belonging to the Lord. I don't know how to explain it to people. If Satan comes to scare you with his scare tactics to steal, kill, and destroy, you remind him it's not yours. Take it up with the owner, see what he says. If he says it's okay, he'll have something better. If he says it's not okay, you don't want to mess with the owner of these things. Are you getting this today? You might say, what does this have to do with finances? I'll tell you what it has to do. Own nothing. Start your life every day giving up ownership of your life and your things. When I teach this, I say there's a symbol. There's a symbol that I've given everything to the Lord. When I grew up in our church, in the Mennonite church, probably not unlike the roots of this church, we had 7 ordinances. I don't know how many of you could name them, but communion, We took the emblems symbolic of the body and blood of Jesus. We always did feet washing. We still do in our church. Not everybody participates, but we still practice it. There was baptism, marriage, anointing with oil. Who can name the other two? I think there's two more. Yeah. Anybody know? Prayer veiling. The women wore prayer veiling as a symbol of both being under authority and being recognizing the protection of angels and so on, and the holy kiss. Now, when I tell about this, I say, I'm really glad we've graduated from that one. Be interesting how many of you remember kissing the preacher when you came into church, but that was part of what happened. When you got baptized, you were greeted with a kiss. We didn't like it. I kind of glad we go to the holy handshake, but anyway, that's... But we missed one. What was it? I'm sorry? Speak up, I didn't hear. Well, you know what, we might have missed more than one. But we missed tithing. Tithing is a symbol that everything I have belongs to the Lord. So every day, every time I bring my tithes to the Lord, I'm really saying everything I have is yours. Quick story. I'm supposed to be done by 20 of or sooner. Okay, I can live with that. Quick story. But you can ask me about this other times. I've been going to India for about 30 years, and Kenya about that long, but about 10, 12 years ago, I think it was, on my first trip to Tanzania. It's too long a story to tell, but I was in Amsterdam on my way to Kilimanjaro, and I saw some men that looked like pastors. So I went over to these guys, and I said, you guys look like pastors. I wonder if you could be pastors. Yeah, we're pastors. We're Seventh-day Adventist pastors. We were in America, in the U.S. We're on our way back home. We were there for a convention. I said, that's interesting. Tell me something. What does Seventh-day Adventists teach about how to get to heaven? And this guy says, we teach that Jesus is the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And I gave him a high five. I said, praise the Lord, that's our message. I didn't know you Seventh-day Adventists knew that. And this guy was standing there, and he says, we're the fastest growing church in the world. Oh, by the way, before I went on this trip, I'm not a real charismatic guy, but every now and then things happen, and I just sense I've heard from the Lord about something. And in this case, I felt like the Lord said, on this trip, Mark, I want you to be a learner. And I said, well, what's that supposed to look like? And I felt like he said, don't do so much speaking. Let others do more speaking. And so he worked that out. I was late for a convention because messed up with my plane ticket. And two guys, again, too long a story to tell, but two guys from Kenya took over. It was just life-changing for them and the church. But anyway, I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be a learner. What's this guy going to tell me about how the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the fastest growing church in the world? So I said, how are you doing it? He said, I can tell you. I said, I want to know. I'm all ears. I want to know how you're doing it. And here's what he told me. He said 98% of our people give 20% of their income to the Lord. He said, we teach tithing isn't giving. Tithing is just not stealing what already belongs to the Lord. I said, you can't say that. That's plagiarism. I've been saying that, so don't. But anyway, and he said, we give 10% to support the local church and then 10% to support foreign missions. And he said, you know what? Our people are doing better financially than they've ever done. That's pretty fascinating. And he names Tanzania and Kenya and I think South Korea. I don't know all the church. but not rich countries. And I said to myself, if that works for them, I should take it back to America and especially to Mennonite churches and say, could we just purpose, we've got a job to do. You know what that job is? Given to us by Jesus. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. We haven't done very good. If we started setting aside 10% of all of our income, I think we could get this job done. That's just, anyway. So don't forget the ordinance of tithing. And here's another point. Never get drawn in by the love of money and quick money schemes. You know, I'm shocked. I don't know how to say this. Scam artists. Anybody here ever heard of one? Anybody here ever been a victim of one? Man, they're shrewd. Yesterday, I get a call from one of the guys in our church, and there's a man had come to the church, and he wanted prayer for his son that had some kind of leukemia, but he also wanted help financially. And I'm a sucker for stuff like that. He was going to be at a hotel in Harrington. I said, I'll come see him. I'm there, I'm saying, Lord, I don't want to be scammed. I get there. He tells me this incredible story of how they left Alabama. They had to come up. They're going on their way to, it was just an incredible story. I didn't believe his story, but I wasn't sure how to find out. So I go in and talk to the proprietor there or whatever, the guy at the thing, and he tells me he's been doing this for, I forget how long, at least a week, getting different churches to come in and pay his bill. And I said, you could at least be honest with me. But what I'm saying is, scam artists, most of the time, you know what? You know how they get us? Go ahead, tell me. A promise too good to be true. And they appeal to greed. And I mean, I could tell you, most of you could tell stories. I could tell you stories. I had someone come to me and say a certain guy, who happened to be a conservative Mennonite, was going to pay 30% interest. He was going to be making so much money that he just wanted to be able to share it with those that are willing to invest. I said, if he'd have asked to borrow money for 6%, maybe. But I'm all knees and elbows away from something like that. It's not ethical. It's not morally correct. And by the way, listen to me carefully. Don't get drawn into quick money schemes. It's not God's way. He warns against it. And be careful about the deceitfulness of greed. Here's another thing. I don't know how to explain this to people. Look for good investments in the kingdom. Jesus clearly taught us, do not lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break through and steal, but do lay up treasures in heaven. And there is a very fascinating scripture. You know what it is? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And I'm intrigued over the years how I have talked to people who have struggled falling in love with God. The greatest commandment, you shall love the Lord your God, and with his stuff, the eternal things. And I tell people, you know what? You start giving and God will touch your heart. It's a funny thing. It's almost as if God looks down from heaven and says, there's somebody that's figured out giving. Let's help his heart get where it should be too. If you're struggling with falling in love with Jesus and his kingdom, start giving. And by the way, give systematically. That's another point. Don't just, I've been intrigued over the years that people say, I tithe. I give $20 every week to my church. I said, how much money do you make? And have you ever heard this? I can't afford to tithe. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, I can't afford not to. You know, it's fascinating to me What's the definition of stupidity? And it's probably not a nice thing to say. It's doing the same things you've always done, expecting a different result. You know people like that. And sometimes when people say to me, I can't afford to tithe, I like to say, what you've been doing hasn't been working. Try something different. There's a story I tell pretty often. This has probably been maybe 15 years ago. I was in Kenya, and they came to me for that weekend, and they said, Mark, we're having a special Sunday to help our widows and orphans. And we want you to speak, and we want you to give a motivational talk. So the rich give to our widows. The wealthy in our church give. What would you say? I could not think of a thing to say. It was really strange. I'm finally up on a platform like this. The widows and orphans are down in the front. And it felt to me like they were looking at me and saying, I sure hope you can speak a good sermon, Mark, about giving. And I had nothing. I had no notes. I was blank. And my heart's pounding. I'm nervous. I'm scared. And something quietly in my heart said, the widow's mite was her tithe, you know. I said, what? The widow's mite was her tithe. And suddenly I had my sermon. I wasn't to talk to the rich that day. I was to talk to the poor. I was to talk to those who were struggling. And I was to tell them, if you want the hand of God to be open, you begin before you can afford it to put into effect the principle of tithing and giving generously. Generosity starts before you're able. You know what was so interesting? Many of those ladies had already learned that. When I got done speaking, they stood up and they said, Pastor Mark, we've already learned that. And they told some amazing stories of how when they gave, when they couldn't afford, how God poured out blessing upon blessing. So be systematic and look for ways. And again, remember this thing of being a cheerful giver. You know, I grew up, my pastor used to say, in China, they reverse this thing. If you give to someone, you thank them for the privilege. Instead of them thanking you, you thank them. My wife and I were in China quite a few years ago, but we were at a restaurant and a heated argument broke out. It was so intense, I thought somebody was going to start fighting. And our guide, I said, what are they arguing about? And remember, I have this childhood memory of our preacher saying, in China, the privilege is to give. And she listened a little bit. She said, they're arguing about who gets to pay for the bill. On that trip, my mother-in-law had needed a couple dollars for something, and I gave it to her. And later she gave it back to me, and my guy just said, if in China, that would have been the most vulgar, gross thing you could have done, was accept that money back from your mother-in-law. But anyway, learn the sheer joy of giving. You know, there's a saying that if you had a Mennonite gathering and you had a line for ice cream and one said free ice cream and the other said $1, the one with the free ice cream would be to the back of the room and the other would be hardly anybody there. I just wish we could change our thinking a little bit. I'm not critical of wanting a bargain, but you know what? Let's change our thinking. One more thing here, so I have time for one story. By the way, we have different motivational gifts. I'm not going to try to teach on spiritual gifts this morning, But there is a gift of giving. I want you to hear something here. One of the tricks of the enemy is to have something very negative happen in the area of your gift. Did you hear what I said? Do you understand what I said? So if you have the gift of giving, the enemy wants you to give, and only you find out you gave to the wrong place, to the wrong person, in the wrong time, and everything about it was bad, and I ain't never doing that again. So don't let that happen to you. But the second thing is, if you know in your heart giving is just a calling of yours, set up some things that you decide ahead of time, everything I make on this project, I'll give to a cause, whatever that is. And some of you that are creative, buy an old house that's run down and get some people to help you fix it up and sell it. And every dollar of the profit is going to go to do a ministry. By the way, if you need some really good places to invest, I have some. In the kingdom, not in my business. Nothing stored in heaven will ever be lost. Do not lay up treasures on earth, where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break through and steal, but do lay up treasures in heaven. You know, I was 15 when I developed a conviction of tithing. Long since I believe we should give more than that. By the way, if you only do your duty, what does the Bible say? If you only do your duty, what does the Bible say? I mean, do they talk back to you when you speak? No, not too much. What's the Bible say? If you only do your duty, you are an unprofitable servant. I love the story. My uncles hated it, but I love it. where the guy goes out and works all day and he comes in at night, and before he gets to have his own meal, he has to make a meal for his boss. And Jesus says, does he get thanked for doing that? No. Only if he goes beyond the call of duty. So he comes in, he makes something, slaps it in front of his boss, he's an unprofitable servant. But if he comes in and he knows his boss's favorite thing and he makes it right and serves him ice cream with a cherry on top, now he's a profitable servant. And we're servants of the Most High God. Let's not just do our duty. Oh, if Christians could get a hold of that. So, when I was 15, I started giving, and something that I take quite a bit of delight in today. My business could fail tomorrow, but I will never undo the giving. It's in heaven stored. Man, I did run out of time. I was going to tell you a story, but do you want a story or you want me to quit?
Go for it.
I'm sorry, James. They said go for it. Yeah. So this quick story. On this trip that I took to Tanzania, and these guys were saying Seventh-day Adventists give 20%. This kind of haunted me. I mean, I tithe systematically, but the rest I just gave kind of haphazard. And I was like, I wonder if I've been doing 20%. I sure shouldn't let them Seventh-day Adventist people beat me, you know. I mean, that's terrible attitude, but that was part of what I was saying. So I went from Tanzania to Kenya, and I'd been supporting some pastors there for a long time. And I would meet with them whenever I went to Kenya, and this time, every single pastor was struggling, saying, we are just poor, Mark. And one guy says to me, I got to make this quick. One guy says to me, I am convinced the devil's not afraid of a poor pastor. I said, what do you mean? Blessed are the poor. It's hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, so why would you say such a thing? Well, he said, if you share Jesus with someone and you're too poor to invite them home for tea and a meal, it's hard to be convincing. I don't know why, when he said that, I said, Lord, I feel for these guys. I'm going to set aside $50,000 out of my business to help these guys. I actually went to them and said, find somebody. We can't run this through the church. Find an individual that we can do this with. And they had a lady that had been in finance and they said was dependable. I sat down with her and I told her, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to run it through your account, but you can't touch a dollar. Not a dollar. If you touch a dollar, I don't want to, I'll pay you for your time. And if you need money personally, I might consider giving it to you, but I need to know you won't touch this money. Oh, Mark, Pastor Mark, I would never touch this money. And I don't want to be paid. I'm just so proud of what you're doing and would love to be a part of it. So I left there, sure, I could trust this lady. I sent $25,000 to help different things, start some chickens and different things. And then I sent another 25. And I hardly got that done until I get a letter from this lady that says, Pastor Mark, I am so sorry, but I had an opportunity to go into business. I was supposed to get my money back by the end of this month. I haven't gotten it back. These men need their money. Is there any way you could send some more money until I get mine back? Well, can you imagine my feelings? I'm immediately angry. And I sent her kind of a nasty letter saying, I will never give you another dollar. You broke a promise. You need to go and repent. My kids were over and I actually showed them this letter and they said, Dad, you don't understand African culture. You might cause that lady to commit suicide. By the time they were done with me, I was feeling terrible. So I called the guys in this day of WhatsApp and everything. I said, you need to call her in. I mean, there's crying, there's tears. They say, Pastor Mark, if you look a little closer, you will see that this email's not from Ruth. It's from some scam artists. But unfortunately, they've been writing to Ruth pretending to be you, and she has sent $25,000 to somebody in Alexandria, Egypt. And so your money's gone. Well, but Mark, Pastor Mark, we're going to fast and pray that you get your money back and then some. And I said, I should have thought of that. I still couldn't believe she gave money without talking to me, to somebody she didn't know. But anyway, I didn't respond too well. A few weeks later, I'm having my morning devotions, and I read the story of the king of Judah who hired soldiers. And as he's getting ready to go out to war, the prophet came and said to him, you better not take those guys. You'll be in trouble. God won't be with you. And the king says, what about all the money I've paid him? And the prophet said, what did he say? The Lord can more than make it up. I was reading that and I laughed out loud. I said, okay. I won't say another word about the scam artists. It was your money. If you wanted them to have it instead of the pastors, that's your business. And if you want to make it up, that would be great. A couple weeks later, I get a phone call. It's too long a story. I got to shorten this. I get a phone call, and they say, are you Mark Yoder? I said, I am. And this guy says his aunt, her name was B.J. Strodell. She probably 30 years ago, I don't know, I was getting ready to go to Thanksgiving service. My wife said, if there's anybody at church today that needs a place to go, just invite them home. And she came. She dropped in unexpectedly at just driving by, stopped in. She didn't have any place to go. We became casual friends. One day, a few years before this, she stopped in and said, Mark, I would like for you to be executor of my will. I'm estranged from my family. Would you do that? After I lost this money, someone thought I should go and talk to somebody who had been a missionary in Africa, and he happened to live not too far from this lady. I called her up. I said, BJ, I've never come to your place, but I'm going to be in your area. Is there any way my friend and I could stop in. She said, oh, please. We had a delightful time. As we're sitting there at this table, I said to her, BJ, you've asked me to be executor of your will. If there's money left over after I've done what your will says, what do you want me to do with the money? Oh, Mark, she said, you go do the mission trips, you take care of orphans, you support pastors, you'll know what to do with it. I said, yeah, but I want direction. I want to do what you tell me. Plenty of time for that. I can still see her. 1 week to the day after that, she was down in Bethany Beach celebrating her 80th birthday. They came in the morning and she was gone. Her family took over, made the arrangements. When they went through her stuff, they found out that I was to be executor of the will. That phone call was, we're turning everything over to you. And by the way, Mark, did you know that you're her primary heir? No, I had no idea. And I couldn't help myself. What do you think her estate is worth? We think it's worth about $750,000. As it turned out, till I paid her bills and some other people, I only got about $500,000 out of it. By the way, I could sit here for another hour telling you amazing stories of God's incredible generosity. By the way, I have a rule, and if you want to get part of your estate, I don't touch any of it. It goes to the mission work. So I haven't even begun to talk to you today about many principles that I think we as Christians ought to have. I personally recommend, this will be my final thought, I personally recommend when you settle your estate, name an extra child. Name it charity and give it to a place. We'll make Jesus known. We have a job to do. One thing I don't want to have happen is that anybody feels burdened or discouraged. That's not our inheritance from Jesus. Just start now, today, doing what the best you can and enjoying incredible favor from God. Hope something here's challenged you. If anybody has questions, you want to ask more, feel free. Thank you. I'm going to let James close the service.